Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Welcome everybody to Nightlight. Thanks for joining me today. It's really going to be an exciting show for me, but first I want to thank Ken Quiethawk for his amazing intro, as always. Please check him out. He is a native storyteller, and he and his wife have an amazing website and have some amazing CDs that teach you how the Native Americans preserved their history, their cosmology, not through the written word, but through the spoken word. And it's a magical form of keeping history alive and well. And you should please check it out. I have with me today one of my favorite authors. I have Charles Pellegrino with me today. And one of his books, entitled Dust, is what we're going to be focusing on initially today. And it is focused on an idyllic Long Island community. And the main character is Richard Sinclair, who is a paleobiologist, and one of the first to suspect that the environment has begun to wage a bloody, terrifying war on humanity. What initially appears to be random, unrelated evidence are actually violent eruptions in a worldwide biological chain reaction. Along with a brave group of survivors, Sinclair must learn to understand the catastrophe, while it roils around them, slowly crumbling a panicked world and threatening apocalypse. The survival of humankind depends on finding an answer immediately, or else they will face the final tragic destiny of their species. Charlie's been known to work simultaneously in, now I know I'm going to twist my tongue on some of these words, so please just bear with me. He has been known to work simultaneously in entomology, forensic archaeology, paleogenetics, and preliminary design of advanced rocket systems, astrobiology, and marine archaeology. He's the author of 18 books, including Return to Sodom and Gomorrah, Unearthing Atlantis, Dust, Ghost of the Titanic, Her Name, Titanic, The Untold Story of the Sinking and Finding of the Unsinkable Ship. He's also the scientist whose dinosaur cloning recipe inspired the Jurassic Park series. He has made dives to the Titanic and to the strange oasis of the deep ocean, hydrothermal events aboard the submersibles, and together with Dr. James Stoff, he formulated the theory that environments similar to the deep ocean volcanic zones might support life in the subsurface oceans beneath the ice of certain moons of Jupiter and Saturn, in what is often called the Europa theory. Now that I've twisted my tongue around so many of these different big words that you can read well but not speak as well, I have to say I've read 3 of Charlie's books, and I find that they are magical and inspirational in many different ways, and they have a poetic essence to them that is almost addictive. You get into them and you can't put them down. And even though you want to sort of pace yourself, you find yourself not able to. They move fast, they are intriguing, they are educational, they are inspirational, and in many ways they open your eyes to a lot of things that have not yet happened but may very well, and especially with the Hiroshima book, to what has happened and has to be remembered so we don't repeat that mistake again. Welcome to the show, Charlie.
Hello.
Hello. I was just noticing as I was reading this, you picked an interesting name for your main character. Sinclair being, of course, a Knights Templar name and stuff like that. Was that intentional, or was that just, it felt right?
No, it was just a name that felt right. And that was before I was called to the whole Jesus family tomb, the Talpiot tomb in Israel, before I even heard of anything like the Da Vinci Code.
Amazing.
So it
just struck
It might
me
even have been an unconscious thing that I loved dinosaurs from the time I was a kid, and maybe the Sinclair dinosaur at the World's Fair. I don't know.
I wanted to ask you about your inspiration. I know, I understand the inspiration for the Hiroshima book, but it feels to me as though there's something else at work within your writing that has a spiritual wisdom connected to it that is really, really important. And what was your inspiration for Dust? Dust was published in 1998. What was your inspiration for the book itself?
Nightmares I woke up to as a kid, as a teenager. I had nightmares of looking up into the leaves of a maple tree, and there were no insect holes in the leaves. And it was a recurring nightmare that every tree, every plant looked perfect, and then I realized it was because all the insects were gone. And so I wrote that initially in college when I was doing science fiction radio drama, kind of thing that was popular for a while. I ended up, because of that, briefly with the National Lampoon Radio Hour. And so I first did it as a radio show. And then the idea just stuck with me. I ended up studying entomology in college, which is the study of insects. And it just sort of stayed with me. Eventually, I started writing the novel when my daughter, Amber, was born. Of course. Yeah. People say, oh, Jurassic Park, so-and-so, this professor says he came up with it first. And that was a whole case. He ended up having to admit before the New York State Supreme Court that he lied, that it was me. It turned out he thought I had died because I was very sick in 1985, but I got better. It turned out it was my doctor who ended up dying, but I got better. But meanwhile, this one guy out in California, he believed the story, and he was originally one of the severest critics of the idea. He was one of the people who chased me out of New Zealand for coming up with what's now known as the Jurassic Park recipe. So I called him up with my recorder going, and I said, hi, I was just reading what you were saying in the New York Times. What a fantastic idea. And he just, homina, 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 I thought you were dead. So there's a novel that a woman recently wrote called The Plot, which pretty much surrounds that idea. Someone who thinks the author is dead and then writes the story himself and gets an email one day.
Yeah. Yeah, somebody a long time ago had something on eBay. I did a deck of cards, and he put it up on eBay, and it said signed by the author, and I never signed. I never signed any of the cards, so I contacted him and I said, do you know the author? And yeah, I know her well, and we went to school together, and yada yada yada. I said, and what card did she sign? And he said, oh, the miracle card. And I said, are you serious? Because he was asking like $600 for the deck, and
Huh.
he went on and on. I said, look, I got to tell you, I'm the author, I'm the painter, and I never signed any of those. So if you actually get $600 for this deck of cards, I deserve 75%, or I'll sue you. He took it down.
Hmm.
I would have loved to
Yeah,
have
I
seen
mean,
if
it was
anybody
kind of fun what happened. The guy, I'm not dead yet. I got better. Oh, I love going back to Monty Python lines.
Oh, geez, yes.
Oh.
Or I died, but I feel much better now.
Yeah. That would have been a good one, yeah.
For those who have not, read Dust, and it is probably one of the most intriguing stories ever. It basically is the story of these small insects or viruses or microbes or whatever you want to call them, just, whacking out and wiping out. And the food chain starts at the very, very bottom and starts to disintegrate. And it's the story of the people and how they try to survive and how they manage to survive, not only by finding their answer in amber, but preserving their story in amber. So,
Yeah. It turns out that, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Oh,
go ahead.
It turns out that I went in the opposite direction of Michael Crichton with the biomorphing recipe, and it's actually, the Jurassic Park recipe with insects. It's what comes to, and the genetic technology, it's what actually in my novel is brought to the rescue, rather than something, oh no, we shouldn't go there at all. And there is now some serious interest from people like Elon Musk in, well, maybe we can biomorph ostriches and emus into some of the theropod dinosaurs once we can actually read the DNA of, for example, ostrich dinosaurs, which looks like they were very intelligent too, would have been very interesting. But I'm not so interested in seeing recreated dinosaurs as all of the medical technology that you pick up along the way to developing a dinosaur biomorphing technology. In fact, we could probably, along the way, during the next 20 years, cure most diseases, possibly even stop or reverse the aging process, possibly even artificially boost human intelligence for everyone. These are interesting things that may actually be in our future if we can survive as a civilization.
Well, the more I thought about it all, the further I got into the book. It was, I have to admit, I'm a gardener, and I would go out and sit in my garden and cheer the bees and butterflies on, knowing that they were doing their job and it was all right, and for a decade or so we're okay. And I often do wonder and worry about what future generations have in store for them. But as far as if you go back millions of years, was our atmosphere different so that those microbes and whatever were able to survive better? I mean, has the atmosphere changed so radically that maybe we aren't supporting
It probably has. The atmosphere was probably, I'm guessing there was more oxygen in the atmosphere in the time of the dinosaurs. We know there definitely was in the period we call the Carboniferous, when we had all these forests and giant club mosses and very, very large insects, dragonflies with 2-foot, 3-foot wingspans, and a lot of other things that probably haven't even been preserved as fossils. So we know back then there was probably a lot more oxygen in the atmosphere. Now, largely through human activity, we're beginning to release a lot of the methane that's in the polar regions. We've just about doubled the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And I do believe there are technological means by which we can solve a lot of these challenges that we create for ourselves. We could, for example, within 20 years, have most of our power beamed, especially as trucking material into space is getting very cheap. We could have solar power microwave beamed to a couple of receiving centers in the deserts, and we could be powering the entire planet from clean solar power from space. And we've got methods now where we can tow things up into space, truck things up into space, getting it down to the price of air freight around the world. And through these magnetic rail guns, we should be able to do that without too much trouble, and to have the Earth solar powered within about 20 years, which would be a good thing because we're probably at least 40 years away from controlled nuclear fusion, which is another semi-clean form of power production. Or we're not sure we'll ever get there, but basically I have a lot of optimism for the future as long as we don't let all sorts of crazy politics and everything else get in the way. We look like we're going to have a stable human population about 2045 at about 9 billion people, and we have the means to provide a good standard of living for 9 billion people in 2045.
Well, I had the pleasure of driving across the country about 10, 12 years ago. And, you know, they talk of overpopulation, and yet we drove through hundreds of miles of land that was not developed and was not populated. I mean, our coastlines for sure are going to sink, but the middle of the country looked pretty reasonably empty. So that you know, if you can get, you know, cities developed and stuff like that, I mean, it just there's so much empty space. Are we overpopulated in cities and stuff like that? Yes, we are, absolutely.
Well, it's more a matter of things with overpopulation and as you have an improving global economy decade by decade, it's not like it was 40 years ago where most of the car pollution, for example, came from North America and Europe, and then China became wealthy, and so you've got another billion people driving cars around. And it's like introducing a whole new carbon expelling animal into the world ecology. Our cars, for example. And so it's accelerating the amount of carbon dioxide we're putting into the atmosphere, which then increases the amount of methane escaping from the permafrost, and even now beginning to escape at an accelerated rate from methane ices in the oceans. And so I think we've already crossed the tipping point for that. Now we're going to have to adapt to it and develop the technology to adapt to it. And there is such technology. We've just got to be smart enough to use it. And one of the points of dust is nature can have all sorts of surprises for us. Imagine if you just deleted the ants from our global ecology. If the world only lost the ants, most people think, okay, we're rid of a few pests, but without the ants, world agriculture dies. And in dust, all of the world's insects disappear. The scary thing is that for some reason, it's become recognizable more in the last 5 years, we are going through what is sometimes called the insect apocalypse, the disappearance of insects, which is a reason that the novel Dust is getting a lot of attention these days. It's, well, what happens if something simple that we normally think of as a pest starts disappearing from the world, when that's one of the things that keeps us alive.
Well, that's interesting because, we've had the bees, dying out, and then we have these killer wasps coming up that literally can kill. I think they're coming up from South America someplace, but I have to admit, at one point you had your scientists in the book talking, and it's true. We do our best to get rid of the bugs, and yet it's the bugs that keep the chain, the food chain going. And I mean, I have to admit, in the last house I had, every spring I had an invasion of these huge black ants, and it got to the point where I tried everything I could think of naturally and homeopathically, and I finally got to the point where it was going to kill the suckers. And then it got to be, all right, spray the outside of the house. If they make it in the house, I'm killing them. There's a lot of land out there. Let them live out there. But if they come in, they're dead. And so and then you look at rose bushes. You want to spray so that they don't get black rot and stuff like that. But it's poison to bugs. And when you think about what we do with our vegetables and fruits, we're spraying them with poisons all the time to keep the bugs off of them so the fruits will develop. But if like I said, I garden. I'm a flower gardener more than anything else. And when I started in with my gardens, I planted peonies, and I could never get my peonies to bloom until somebody took me aside and said, "You see all these ants on them?" And I said, "Yeah, I keep spraying them to get the ants away." He said, "Well, if you let the ants stay, they will eat the sap and allow the flower to bloom." So I had one season of no peonies, and then from then on, I welcomed the ants to eat the sap off of the bloom. So I had flowers, but it is an amazing ladder, and from the tiniest little microbe all the way up to you and me. And if you take too many of the rungs out, you stop the ladder.
Yeah. As a kid, I was allergic to wasps and bees, and so naturally I was attracted to them. But found them absolutely fascinating the more and more I learned about them.
Well, you studied so many different things.
And we depend on them. We depend on some of their relatives, absolutely, like the ants.
Well,
although I'll never come to really, really like yellow jackets. They're like the New Jersey drivers of the wasp family.
Only a New Yorker would understand that, I have a feeling. But no, the way that you wove this story together was absolutely magical. So I have to go back to your style of writing, because metaphysics is my bailiwick. So it feels to me like there is something, I don't want to say otherworldly, but I would go so far as to say there is the element here of channeling another level of wisdom and intellect and poetry into the way that you're writing. I mean, do you feel that energy when you're writing? Do you feel a shift and change? Or does it just come second
I'm
hand
just
to
in
you?
a very peaceful place when I'm writing, and I don't even know, people say they like things about my style, and I was writing a series of books under a pen name with a co-author at one point, and he said, they're going to figure you out from your style. You've got to change your style. And I said, I don't even know how to change my style. I don't even know how I write. It's just there when I wake up in the morning and I do it.
You are probably the envy of a lot of different authors because of that. No, there is, your style of writing has a flow to it, has an energy to it, and if anybody really wants to check it out, they should read the Hiroshima book and the Dust book, and then read the Telepot Tomb book, which is the story of the tomb of Jesus' family.
Right, and that one was, that book got very controversial, and I don't know how, because what was out there in the news, I sometimes wondered if people writing about the same tomb that I and my colleagues explored, and which we studied the samples in the New York Crime Lab, and I mean, people were going on about the skeleton of Jesus or bones of Jesus in this one ossuary. That's what they call the bone box, that this one minority culture, which we would know nothing about if not for what's in the Second Testament written about the process of primary burial and, the body laid out on a shelf in a tomb. And it was a culture that existed for only about 80 years in Israel, especially in the Jerusalem hills. But the Jesus ossuary, as I had said when Jerry Falwell had called to yell at me at Fox News one night in 2007, and I said, that's the ossuary in which there were no bones. We scientists, the fibers, the trace fibers from a burial cloth, they were completely pristine. They had never been in the presence of a decaying body during a process of primary burial before bones were collected and put in an ossuary. And in that particular ossuary, people had only placed 2 cloths of unusual composition. We were missing a body. And that's what people of faith would have said people like me should have expected to find in that tomb. And if there were no other ossuary except for the one that was marked with the words Jesus, son of Joseph, in Aramaic, and that there were 3 crosses, 2 of them brought together to form a star on the lid of the ossuary. If there were only that and nothing else, it would have been absolutely fascinating. And then you find Maria in a Latinized Aramaic, and you find Mariamene Mara, which is the Greek name, and in Greek, the Greek name for Magdalene, but appearing to be identified by the term Mara, which is referring to a female master of the congregation. And Mariamene is, the Greek for one of the forms of Greek for Magdalene. So, and in looking at that ossuary, there's the DNA of only one person. There are ancient apocryphal texts that refer to her and her brother Philip as having been abolitionists and freed many slaves, and what happened afterward, and the indications that she would be in that family too. The same thing that's kind of misquoted in that novel, the Da Vinci Code. The Da Vinci Code. The original text actually refers to Jesus. That and the Thomas text suggests that Jesus never was given authority. That's the word used, was never given authority, presumably by God, to beget or to marry. And it mentions there are many mentions of the encouragement to adoption, and that the family and the disciples, they adopted children and became the fathers of many children, that adoption of orphans was a centerpiece of charity in their faith. So he may or may not have been married. She may or may not have been married. It's not completely clear, but there are some indications that there were adopted children.
Well, I think
and one of whom would have been Didymus Judas Thomas, the beloved disciple.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think what fascinated me so much about that particular book was that, it was archaeologists that were documenting it all. It wasn't,
Yes, yes.
Just anybody. It was real archaeologists doing all of this, and
bringing crime lab techniques into the archaeological site, which was, the field of forensic archaeology was only being born, and was actually created by, they called her the woman of the bones, Sarah Bizel, and she started the whole process in Pompeii's sister city of Herculaneum. And she had died before she ever really got to see the field become legitimized in the scientific community, except for National Geographic and the Smithsonian. This pioneer of the whole field was literally treated as garbage by most of the archaeological community.
Well,
so
they always
Harold Orr Sigurdsson and I were always making sure that Sarah Bizel is credited and remembered for the field she had begun.
Yeah,
and
just
so
it's
basically basically we followers or students of Sarah Bizel who brought the crime lab methodology to the Talpiot tomb.
Well, I think that book fascinated me, but it's written differently. That's more of a it's almost like a journal of this happened and this happened and this happened and this happened. And Dust is, of course, a fictional story, but there is an amazing flow to it. And then of course you've got the Hiroshima book, which is, I think, one of the everybody should read that. It should be required reading. Because
I think especially people making decisions of war, and especially wars that might go nuclear.
Yeah.
Because most people do not know what really happened on the ground under the bombs. And it can only be viewed now through forensic archaeology, then compared with all the survivor accounts, which pretty much became our approach to the Titanic as well. And then then the Talpiot tomb, and then Hiroshima and Nagasaki. For some reason, I had been interviewing survivors since I was in high school, every time there was an opportunity. And then it became comparing, where were you when this happened, and what happened near you here and there, and then just getting people at different places at different radii outward in both cities.
Do you have a
few decades went into figuring all that out.
Yeah. Do you have a do you find that you are drawn to certain topics that then you feel compelled to write about?
I think those topics, it's sort of like something James Cameron said about Avatar, that it was a story developing in him since he was a child. And I think these are topics that since childhood, and probably what made me more interested in Hiroshima and Nagasaki was starting with the duck and cover drills when I was a child, and then learning more about, through the drills, what an atomic bomb does, and quickly began to realize grown-ups must be out of their minds, that they would build these things and think of exploding them on people. And then in high school, I had a friend whose father was in the FBI. We were all told kind of like, he does, accounting and stuff, but he was expert on all sorts of things involving explosions. And he was the first person to ever mention to me, there were people who survived both Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And so he first introduced me to survivors of the bombs. And so I just went on learning more and more and more. But I did notice when there was that he just knew about all sorts of things about volcanic eruptions and the destruction of St. Pierre in 1902 by the eruption on the island of Martinique. He knew everything about that eruption and the people. And so, yeah, I guess that was one chance encounter that sort of headed me, shaped my direction somewhat.
Well,
Even while I was working in other fields and never knew it. And then I'd keep running into Hiroshima survivors and Nagasaki survivors.
I was fascinated that you had that, what would you call it, that drone that was on the moon. It was on the moon, somebody's moon that was drilling down into the center of it to get to the ocean.
The novel, right? The
in dust.
Ocean in dust, right? Saturn's moon Enceladus and the geysers and snowstorms into space. That wasn't anything like any kind of precognition or anything. Jesse Stoff and I, who were kids together at the 4-H camp on Long Island, he did the math. I figured out a few other things kind of visually, and and then he and I came up with the Europa theory and started publishing in the area in the 1970s. And in fact, we got a book contract, and first the articles and then the book contract. And Isaac Asimov, when he first met us, and Jesse's brother, because I also wrote a book with Jesse Stoff's brother, Josh, about the design and how they came up with the Apollo lunar module, and even where they figured out if we add a little more of this and a little bit of that, the lunar module could become a lifeboat if anything happened to the command module, service module system, that it could tow the capsule back to Earth, and which is exactly what happened during Apollo 13. And so Josh and I were writing that book. We were doing all of this stuff in our teens and early 20s. And Isaac Asimov said, "How old are you guys?" "Oh, I'm going to buy all of your books just so I can stick pins in them." But and someone in 2003 on one of the expeditions to the hydrothermal vents, one of the NASA guys there was saying, "Oh, that's impossible. You and Stoff, you couldn't have." I had a professor who said he thought of it first. And I told him, when we published and when we did this and that. And he said, "But that's crazy. You would have had to be teenagers." And I said, "Yeah, we were." And the funny thing is, all three of us, Jesse and Josh and I, we were all three of us dyslexic kids. And some experts had said when we were little that we would never be able to read books, much less that we'd all grow up to write them together.
That's so cool. In 2001, A Space Odyssey.
Yeah.
At some point in time during that movie, a message was sent back to Earth, and they were told to leave one of the moons alone of Saturn.
Oh, that was in 2010, the novel Odyssey 2, and it was Europa, that they were told to all these worlds belong to you except Europa, attempt no landings there.
Exactly. So I was fascinated with the Europa
acknowledged me and Jesse and me in that in the novel. Yeah. It
fascinated me that the Europa theory suddenly came up, and I remembered that message supposedly back from whoever.
Right.
To leave Europa alone. And, so the purpose...
And I thought many people think, that weak sequel to 2010, and I just say, to 2001, A Space Odyssey, and I just say, watch both movies together. They really do work well together.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But I was trying to figure out. I mean, you had this little module digging down into it didn't
Saturn
feel like
moon
it fit.
installated.
Yeah, it didn't feel like it fit into the whole rest of the rest of the book, and I was kind of wondering why was that there.
Well, the point was that they find life, and it's like the big discovery of all time that there exists extraterrestrial life. But by that point on Earth, the ecological crisis, the plagues and everything are to such extent that people on Earth hardly notice at all, which was, I kind of looked back to that while we were all in lockdown and COVID-19 and, we're losing friends and family members and everything. And then on the news, suddenly there's a thing about the Tic Tacs flying around. And what was most amazing to me is it felt like that scene out of Dust where the world just didn't notice. It's like the Pentagon is releasing information. Guess what? There's something flying around that's disobeying all of our physics, and it looks like it's not one of ours. And with everything else that was going on in the world, it was like, it's just one more thing. And people kind of yawned at it.
Well, I think too it was interesting in how you pegged society as it would begin to crumble. People just they wouldn't accept it because they couldn't believe it could possibly be happening, and people were in denial for so long that it got ahead of them. And the fact that there was you have the character that's a manipulative kind of leader that emerges.
Kind of like a composite of a real rogue gallery I've seen over the years, rolled into one person.
But it happens, and these people take advantage of situations like this. And they whip people into a frenzy, and I see it happening today. People get swept away in riots, and they begin rioting themselves, and they don't know what they're rioting for. And that seems to be happening even today as we speak. Not maybe right this moment, but we're seeing it in lots of places. So I think that in 1998, so that was 25 some years ago, give or take.
Right.
The life was not the way it is today, and you're seeing. I swear that my philosophy is that science fiction is just a way of getting human consciousness to accept the fact that this weird stuff is going to be happening in our future. And my best example is Star Trek. When it came out and they had the doors opening and shutting for them, that was really cool, and how wild is that? And now we all walk into malls and stuff like that and don't think twice about the doors opening and shutting. The tricorders, so much of the stuff that
like
was written
medical
into
equipment in hospitals, and
absolutely.
And what got me was we were still doing duck and cover drills when Star Trek came out. And I mean, we were being brought up on the world is going to end in fire very soon. And they had added a new wing to my junior high school, and they were all proud of taking us down into the shelter and showing this is the biggest fallout shelter in any school in the country. And they even had simulated things on a TV about Washington is just a bowl of glass or something like that. And, Washington, D.C. is gone. And it's like, and we're going to step out into what if we're down here in this shelter? And where do, it's a big space, but where do we go to the bathroom? And is there enough food for 2,000 kids and teachers? And where will our parents be?
Well, and
all of that was going on then, and then Star Trek came on to TV. And
yeah.
after hearing the Russians are going to drop atomic bombs and kill us all, and we were being told, the Russians are evil, and I mean, I got in trouble over writing a wrong, for the English teacher, a wrong view of what the book Animal Farm meant, and and got called a communist by the teacher. And
oh my God.
So all of this was going on, and then Star Trek comes on, and there are these people on the bridge. In fact, it struck me more than the technology of this science fiction bridge of a starship that, whoa, there's a Russian, and there's some guy from China or Japan that his family came from, and there's a black woman right there running the communications. And it just struck me as someone sees this hopeful future. And then in 2001, I was on a Russian research vessel with Russian deep diving submersibles, and there was that whole mix, and we were all family. And, and deep down in the ship is where mission control was, and it just looked like the bridge of the Enterprise. And, here we are on a mission out at sea, exploring the Titanic, and I'm thinking Gene Roddenberry got it right. And then, of course, that was August of 2001, and right around the corner while we were out there at the Titanic, 9/11 happened. And, it was just like all that hope for the future. For a moment, it was knocked down. And it was,
I can remember when I was in the first, second, third grade, we did the, an alarm went off, and we had to get under our desks and cover our heads. And then even in the 70s, when I was teaching school, we had the drills where we took the kids down into the basement and had them facing the wall or getting down and putting their heads on their knees and covering their heads. And, because that element of a nuclear explosion was still imminent. And they don't do it anymore, but the bombs are still out there. And it is scary. And I think in dust especially, you made a very... I was going to ask you. I know that there are the missile bunkers around and the people with the keys around their necks. I know they exist. But one of the things
that's actually described from the instruction manuals from missile bunkers and described in detail from. So if I'm writing something like that, I go to the people who are retired from the Air Force and what I'm allowed to write about. I got it all cleared first, and the only thing that was kept classified that I couldn't put in the novel was how they stored food. So in the novel, I just improved on the design for that. But all the instructions, all of that, the whole operational procedure, it's all true.
I think that's what fascinated me was that in the book, the floor had many layers of food, and that you literally would eat your way through the floor, the different levels. That there had to be years worth of food there for them. But I'm wondering do they make allowances
for
the
fact? In reality, it wasn't all that much food that they had stored for them, because once the missiles were away, they had served their purpose, and we just left them, okay, you have some chance of survival here. And they also had gold coins that they could bring out with them. Oddly enough, it's just, rolls of British sovereigns with the gold coins that they had.
Oh, wow. It just, like I said, you've gone into such detail in so many places that it makes one wonder, okay, if this does exist, and I know that there are mountains where there are control centers and where politicians are meant to be taken in case of whatever, but that's if there's warning. And in this case, there really wasn't warning. It just started, and then everybody shut everything off, and it was like, what's going to be left of the country? And how do you get going again? And if people look into the fact that there have been at least 5 mass extinctions that they've been able to identify, where we've been sent back to almost single cells, the thought that this, Lord knows how technologically advanced the last ones were, because they're gone, they're wiped out. So, we shouldn't think too much of how advanced we are, because
there are some groups of dinosaurs that I think were on the verge of becoming, especially with what we're learning about some of their nearest living relatives, ravens and New Zealand's Kia birds and cockatoos, that they're just so intelligent. And the dinosaurs I'm talking about, they had manipulative limbs, hands. And then the asteroid hit, and that was the end of that. Well, the global climate was getting much, much cooler. We were starting to get ice-rafted sands, and the shallow seas were withdrawing from the continents. A lot of different things were going wrong. And a lot of things had already gone extinct before. It's kind of like someone looks up and sees a bright star in the sky that's the asteroid moving night by night closer to us, and it's, geez, is that something else we should worry about? And in a way, it's kind of like the world today. The only thing is the dinosaurs didn't have a civilization and a space program and technology that was advancing at an accelerating rate that could either destroy us or save us. The scary thing is every civilization that has reached a kind of technological peak has either gone stagnant for centuries and centuries, or it went extinct. So far, up to this point in time, every civilization has become a ghost story.
Yeah.
And hopefully we can get past that without becoming someone's future story of the fall of Rome, fall of Greece, or the next Atlantis legend.
Well, that's one of the things that bothered me for a while. It still does, but not as greatly. And my thought was, okay, if mass extinction happens, my home is going to, over 1,000 years, if it's left alone, will just crumble to the ground. There will be nothing left here. And so what will be left of
Actually,
our
that's
civilization?
not always true. What's your toilet made of? The porcelain will last millions of years.
Okay.
Mosaics in the subways of New York will last forever. And in fact, after the Titanic is gone, the porcelain toilets will still be there. The porcelain tiles from the Titanic's Turkish baths, 60 million years from now, they're still there. And every civilization is going to discover the practicality of making ceramics and things like porcelain. And presumably every civilization throughout the galaxy, most civilizations, maybe they don't survive. We may be, when you look out to the stars, you may be looking out to a galaxy of fossilized toilets.
Oh, God. That's a horrifying thought.
There's a cheerful thought. And subway tiles.
Well, no, my thought was 1 million or so years from now, if there was a huge blast and humanity disappeared and all that was left was, the trees and stuff like that, the only thing I know of that would be a testimony to our culture would be Mount Rushmore, maybe, because it's carved in stone.
If people don't decide to blow that up. I mean, there are people who are calling for that.
Oh, God. But that's the only thing that I think would stand the test of that kind of time. And so it you know, to me, it's like, how do we leave a message to the future? You know, that this is what we've done and these are the mistakes that we've made, and, you know, try not to make the same ones because it doesn't end well.
There was a scene in the novel on the beach where they were basically carving messages on glass and putting them in a mountain somewhere. And of course, in dust, they were leaving messages to the future in amber.
Yeah. And I loved where they buried them. That was fabulous.
Yeah. And the last message to go in was from a child. And actually, that message from the little girl is based on a letter that Eva Hart wrote with her mother from the Titanic.
Oh, wow.
And it's actually the same message she wrote.
Well, you certainly have pulled on a lot of heartstrings in all of this. It's just when you think of what it would be like. I mean, we had power outages here first we had the pandemic, and then I lost power, so I lost I lost all electricity, and I lost my telephone. And the isolation that you felt suddenly being out of touch with everybody and everything was so profound. I cannot imagine what it would be like if they no longer existed, if we could no longer get fuel for our cars, so that we were stuck to be on foot without any way of communicating, without electricity for things like cooking, and no computers, no radios, no nothing. I mean, life would be, it would take us back so fast, so far. It would be profound.
Yeah.
And you know, if I don't understand something, I Google it. With that not being available, and with the fact that libraries and books are going out of style now, so that everything is either electronic or it's not.
Yeah.
We could easily be looking
and
at...
I still prefer real books to Kindle and things like that, so it's become a joke. Charlie and Mary have so many real books in the house, they can never move. Well,
the last time I moved about 2,000 books. And I did finally donate them to the library. I kept my important ones, but because, you know, it's if suddenly something happened, I could keep my, you know, that what was it? It was a Twilight Zone thing with James Meredith.
Oh yeah, right.
Meredith.
All the time in the world, and his glasses broke.
Yes. Yes.
And that came up at the beginning of the plague and bunkering in, and I said to someone, well, Mary and I have multiple pairs of spare glasses. So
absolutely.
We'll survive that.
Just...
no one knew in the beginning how long we were going to have to be bunkered in.
That's true.
And it's amazing that the vaccine came together as quickly as it did. And people do not appreciate how lucky we are. If it happened 10 years earlier, we didn't have the ability. It would have been 3 years before we even had a vaccine.
Well, they're talking about locking us down again.
Yeah, over breakthrough infections, and it's just, right now all that can be said is we just don't know. We have to look at where Great Britain and Israel had these breakthrough infections ahead of us to see how bad this can be. And, probably in about 2 or 3 weeks we'll have a better idea. But, all anyone can really say right now is probably it's not that bad, but we really don't know. So, maybe taking some extra precautions is a good idea.
Yeah, maybe.
I'm just thankful that most probably if you get a breakthrough infection of the D strain, it's, even if you're over 65 and you have an autoimmune disease, you're probably not going to end up in the hospital sick. You're almost certainly not going to end up on a ventilator or dying from it. And a year ago, you could not have said that. And
that's true.
It's a year ago, not only the U.S., but the world was starting to go crazy with riots.
I know.
Which oddly is something that happened in dust among all the other bad things in the environment that were kind of just striking a bad chord all at once. We had a disease that got out there that affected less than 1% of the population. And yet it led to the ultimate disasters.
Well, and we're beginning to see riots
somehow,
again.
There are always things like Stephen King's The Stand where 99% of the people die. And when I was writing Dust, I was thinking, what if you had something that affected less than 5% of the population? The fear, the craziness, and everything could still bring down civilization. And in Dust, there was also, I spoke with accountants and people worked on Wall Street, and this happens and that happens, and that's why the great disaster that brings on much of what goes wrong is economic collapse and collapse of transportation, of gasoline and food, and fear of this moat plague that does not affect that many people, but the fear of it shuts down the whole country.
Oh, fear is something else. It's amazing. When I saw what was happening to people, just neighbors and friends, it was really fascinating how everybody reacted a little bit differently, but there was that edge to everything, kind of like, no, I don't want to be in a big crowd, and I'm claustrophobic, so I stay away from big crowds. I mean, I understand that if you're in a big auditorium with thousands of people, there is plenty of air, but I can't breathe.
Yeah.
I just know
I'm
going to suffocate.
My thing is that working in the dust in Ground Zero, New York, and the reason I went in was there were things that could be learned that applied to volcano physics, and that, working with the team at University of Rhode Island, it could save lives in the future. Probably already has. The Italian edition of the documentary that was made appeared to have driven home to some people that the only way to survive a volcanic surge cloud is take the stipend of 30,000 euros from the government and move out of the hot zone and the surge cloud zone. And a lot of people did, so it probably has saved lives in the future. But that was our thinking. We've got to go in there. It may save lives in the future. And a few of us, I got Ground Zero lung. And so I became, before the COVID plague struck, I was already, I'll go to a movie theater. If there's a great movie I wanted to see, I would wait a few weeks until not so many people were going, and I would go for the morning matinee on a weekday when I had the whole theater basically to myself, or me and Mary, or me and one of the kids. And just to lower the probability of catching a common cold, because when you have Ground Zero lung, your immune system hyper-responds to the common cold, and it's like the cytokine storm. You can get pretty sick. And in fact, one of my friends One of my friends
I have
that
this,
worked in there with
yeah.
me, he got a common cold that went through his family, and in a single weekend he was gone in 2014.
Wow. I have the same problem.
And yeah, and COVID,
And
it used up a lot of ground zero survivors and workers.
oh, absolutely, absolutely. No, it's there's so much going on in the world today that people are oblivious to simple things they should do to help preserve their life, and it is frightening that these occurrences do happen. But Dust is just an amazing book, and I was fascinated with the detail that you got into, and not only that, every time I thought, okay, they'll be able to breathe easy for a minute or two, and
Yeah, it's going to get better, right? Yeah.
no, and you didn't let it, and it was like, holy crap, what
Haven't
more
we
can
all had
possibly?
days like that where it just gets worse and worse and worse?
Oh yeah, no, I mean, happily I'm retired. If a day looks like it's going to be that way, I go back to bed.
And I remember an editor who said about, the airship, the Blue Peace blimp, and he said, no, you can't let that happen to that airship. The thing is too beautiful.
Oh yeah, that was incredible.
When my agent came in to defend me on that, and of course it's, it ties in with all the other things that are kind of spiderweb together in the book and what led to that. And the editor is saying, no, you have to let the airship get through and that they complete their mission and everything. And you can't, one editor was very upset. He said, the ship is too beautiful to damage. And my agent said, the Titanic had two sister ships, according to Charlie. Can you name one of them? And the editor was like, yeah, it's got to happen. He came back and was like, yeah, it's got to happen. And actually, when I started writing the novel, the week my daughter was born. And of
Oh
course,
wow.
the novel leads up to what became my worst nightmare. What if there was something that could save so many lives? I mean, pretty much save billions of lives in the final outcome. And you had to choose between that and letting go of your child as she's looking into your eyes, knowing the choice you have to make. What would you do? With billions of lives on one shoulder, and in your hand you're holding your child, and you're going to have to let her drop to her death as she's looking into your eyes. What would you do? I won't spoil it. I won't answer.
Well, okay, I
And the
won't
point
either, but
that, and the point of realization that he would be killing more people than Hitler and Stalin combined by that choice, which that's where the editor would not budge, that line had to be removed from the book.
oh really?
And, yeah, and James Cameron said, so in the new edition, that thought will be in the book. But James Cameron had said that was one of the most important lines in the book, and the editor made it be removed. Not just the editor, the publisher way upstairs, that line had to be removed. You couldn't put that kind of guilty thought on this guy. Which means, the editor and the publisher liked the character.
Yeah.
And also
Well,
in the original draft of the novel, he didn't make it. And but I do like that. I like the way the novel ends now.
I
Plus,
did too.
there's the movie, and actually, Bruce Berman at Village Roadshow had said in the beginning, this is just a couple of years ago, that he would like to see it as a series. And I like the idea, and he asked me if I had ideas on how to make it into a series. And Burke and Olson have written I love the screenplay. I love these two guys because when I saw their first film, Villains, I just looked at it and had the same feeling as when I saw Memento, the first Terminator film. We're going to, when I, the first time I saw a Quentin Tarantino film, it was just immediately, we're going to hear a lot more from these guys. And I had the same feeling about Burke and Olson. And when I heard they were doing the screenplay, I said, please tell me they want to also direct it. Because they wrote a screenplay and directed the film Villains, and they have a dark sense of humor. And they're very, very good with it, and I loved it. So that's happening. And I haven't written a sequel, but I have worked on what would be a tie-in novel to it with Richard Sinclair. And you learn a lot more about the story of his wife, Dawn, who dies in the first chapter of the book.
Oh, yeah. Well, I have to say that I've been I've gone to a number of movies that there was obviously there was book 1, book 2, book 3, book 4, and I've gone to all of those movies, and I think it was one of the Trilogy of the Ring books, and I sat through what I thought was the last movie, the last book, and it ended, and I realized they'd broken it in half. And I sat there in the movie theater saying, I said, this is so not fair. And, having read the book, I knew what was... They did that with one of the Harry
Potters, too, yeah.
Yeah, and...
Where they broke it into two.
It really bugged me. That and the fact that I will be very disappointed if they change too much of it, because it was... What was it?
Actually,
it was,
this movie is actually sort of a prequel, and it deals more with the moats and the origin of the moats.
Okay.
So, and I just really like what they did with it. And
so
at the beginning, I was like, no, a movie should be an impressionistic painting that moves and sings, based somewhat on the book, because except there are very few cases. Misery being one of them, where it's just like the book. And Kathy Bates, she is exactly like who you picture in the book. But very few movies that very closely followed the book were really that good.
Well, I read, I forget who wrote it now.
So I didn't want anyone to follow the book too closely, because then also it's like, when you read a book and you go to the movie, or you see the movie and you go to the book, you want it to be you want it to to be different.
Well, I don't know. I read
exceptions like Misery, and then a few movies that somehow the movie is actually better than the book. Take Shawshank Redemption, and that's not saying that it was a great novella. Somehow, you had such talent involved in the movie that it came out actually better than the Stephen King story. And he is one of my favorite writers of all time.
Oh, mine too. Dan Brown, though, wrote a book called Inferno. And I totally loved the book. And so I went and saw the movie, and they changed the ending. And I'm sitting there saying, oh, no. They changed the whole purpose, the whole meaning, the whole whatever of the entire book by changing the ending. And spoiler alert to anybody who's going to read the book, turn me off now. In the end of it's about a virus that somebody has developed because they're going to release it because the world is overpopulated and they have to decrease the population, and this virus is going to do that. And then he kills himself after he puts the virus someplace, and it's a time release. It's going to be released at a certain time frame.
Oh, yeah.
And
yeah.
so the whole book is going through trying to get to the virus before it's released. And in the movie, they get there and they stop the release of the virus that is released to depopulate the planet. In the book, they get there and it's been released, and what it does is sterilize most of the people. And in my opinion, that's what this virus has done.
Which,
I think COVID. Either COVID or the vaccine.
I don't know. I don't think there's any evidence of that yet. No.
No, that's just me saying that's what I think it was for. And, we'll see what the birth rate does. But I would bet you that either
because
the
I don't
virus
think anyone would really see a need for it, because the current projections of the world population, as countries become more wealthy, and you have husbands and wives having to work now. What they were trying to instill as law in China, the one-child-only rule, people are having smaller families, or putting off having kids altogether. Things are changing, but the population is leveling off, and sooner than we thought it would. And it's been happening over the last 30 years.
I swear.
And a lot of people are alarmed now. Oh, how is the younger population going to take care of the older population? Well, ask Governor Coomer what he did here in New York. But people are all worried about the economic impact. Well, we'll adapt to that. We'll find ways and everything. The important thing is our population is not going to soar up to about 12 billion people, and where suddenly the Earth's carrying capacity drops down to 9 billion people, and then at the moment the 3 billion people have to starve to death or die. That's when wars go completely out of control, and on a planet that's still nuclear weapons armed to the teeth.
Yeah, well,
but it looks like that scenario, the Soylent Green scenario, where watch a good double feature would be Silent Running and Soylent Green, followed by Cloud Atlas. But the Soylent, the world would have had nuclear war long before it reached the stage of Soylent Green, and we're not going, it looks like we're not going to go into that dystopian, all the people starving world and into, the thermonuclear inverse to the golden rule. And it looks like we may dodge that bullet. But we've got to be very wise, and we've got to pay attention.
Are you familiar with the Georgia Stones?
Those are I think I know what they are.
They're the Georgia Guidestones that were, 500 million is what they want the population to be at. It had 10 things: 500 million population of the world, improving fitness, unite humanity with a living new language. It's a new way of life, and they don't know who erected the stones, but they're there. And
it's that thing. It's sort of like a mini Stonehenge.
Yes. And
I forget what it's carved out, and someone just put it up there.
Some rich person put it up. They're beautifully carved. But the main thing is that maintain humanity at 500 million. And, we're way over that. So
that might actually be a little small for innovation. And it's,
well, yeah.
It used to be you had to wait. You really had to wait a couple of centuries before a Da Vinci or an Einstein came along. And yet now we have about a dozen of them walking around at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And,
well, there's a lot of there are a lot of brilliant people
working with some of them. So,
I
and they're
think
usually
that
polymaths. So you get in a room together and you cover everything from dinosaurs to interstellar flight and God, the universe, and everything in between.
Absolutely. No, they're out there. The only thing is that humanity is not paying attention. I don't think. As a whole, everyone is.
Yeah, but that's humans being humans. I think if we're at a population of 500 million or 9 billion, we're still probably going to have the same proportion of people who are behaving like crabs in a bucket. They see one moving up ahead, and they want to pull it back in.
Yeah. Well,
you
archaeology.
You always have the same proportion of people who are acting like yellow jacket wasp.
Well, and archaeologists haven't changed. Archaeologists have not changed any over the centuries. They still are very reluctant to be open to a change.
Many archaeologists are like that, and you find the same thing in anthropology. And I've always wondered why there are certain things that go along with certain fields of study. For instance, anthropology has a lot of people who plagiarize each other. It's the only science I know where you'll find some guy serving time in prison, writing his papers from prison, where he's serving time for having poisoned the judge after he's under investigation for forcing students to sell Quaaludes and maybe murdering his wife before he plagiarized her papers. I mean, it's just, anthropologists can make you very unhappy. Just ask Jane Goodall about all the abuse she had to deal with during her life.
Oh my goodness.
Wonderful person, horribly abused early in her career by her colleagues.
Yeah.
Yet, particle physicist and botanist. I have never, ever met a particle physicist or a botanist that I did not like. They're just fun, wonderful people.
Well,
and the ocean explorers as a whole are also pretty fine people to be around. Except for some reason, when some of them approach the Titanic, they get a bit tense and angry, and I don't know, there are a lot of angry people involved in the Titanic for some reason. But certain things go with certain fields, and I have no explanation as to why.
Well, I would think with something like the Titanic, I mean, figuring out exactly why and how it's pretty clear what happened. But I think what I have found fascinating is when you look at the pictures of the debris field and how, and like you said, the porcelain from the Titanic is also an area of fascination for me. I haven't read your books yet, but it's always been an area of fascination. And it kind of, I find it interesting that the battleships from Hawaii that were sunk there are considered tombs. And yet the Titanic does not seem to be considered a tomb.
Oh, it is. It definitely is. It's,
I know it is.
Mostly treated that way, yeah. And George Tulloch, who was one of the people who recovered a lot of the artifacts, he dealt with everything very, very gently. And in fact, when there was an area in 1996 near the stern where we're finding, animal remains from the kitchen that were intact and knew that from the galley, and that we knew that there were probably under this ejector blanket is where you might find human bones. And he actually put some artifacts back where they had been found, where we were finding the animal remains, and they declared, don't even land there. It was almost like what you mentioned before about Europa, attempt no landings there, and that area was marked off that you just don't even land there. No, everything I've seen, the Titanic has been dealt with respect. While we're on the subject, during the expedition this past summer, some of the photos that are coming in of the wreck and the debris field are beginning to look pretty frightening, that there's been changes down there, at least in that region around the Titanic. A lot of the wildlife we need more data. In the early photos and videos that have come through, it looks like a lot of the wildlife is withering or disappearing. And the tunicate on the bow section, these organisms called gorgonarians, they're shrinking, and there are many fewer of them. It's no longer, as it was even a couple of years ago, a good place for filter feeding life. So we don't know what's happening. It could be the currents changing. I expected that there would be less down there, that there would be some decrease, and I wanted to see, okay, can we get a close-up visual of these gorgonarian colonies? They're little jellyfish-like animals that live on stalks, and they look very bushy. And there's one of them that's been studied for a couple of decades now. It's on the very point of the rail on the bow section, and it's hardly there at all this year. And I expected that with fishing fleets mostly staying at home, first they were running out of fish from overfishing, and then during COVID that there would be fewer fleets, that the fish stocks in the upper waters would be increasing, eating more of the animal plankton, which is a good thing because that would be doing less grazing on the microscopic plant plankton, which is really where we get our oxygen from and really where a lot of the carbon dioxide gets taken from. It's the top 60 feet of the ocean surface, and not the Amazon rainforest, although the Amazon rainforest is a big chunk, but most of it is the ocean surface. And so I expected that, but not what we're seeing in these early photographs that are coming through now. And it's looking like it's going from being a deep ocean garden into a desert. And it's beginning to look like that. And I hope it's not something more than just the zooplankton crisis has kind of been resolving itself in the upper waters, to something like the deep ocean currents changing.
Well,
and
I remember...
and if whether or not that's caused by us, a change in the deep ocean currents, that's what dictates whether pretty much the weather all over the world.
But I think I remember seeing a documentary on the Titanic within the last year or so that was saying that the rust was increasing to the point where it was starting to implode.
It is, and that's guaranteed to happen. Yes, we were noticing, and if you take one of those icicle-like structures that Bob Ballard named rusticles, and they grow annual growth rings before they develop the channels inside of them. They're very complex, marvelous colonial organism, and with just the rusticles themselves are a deep ocean pharmacy of future medicines. But if you break them off and you look at the rings, and we were able to determine in 2001 that they're monitoring the health of the oceans above the Titanic. And the Titanic is the single most frequently visited column of deep ocean water, 2.5 miles deep. And the rusticles, they weren't able to get a good sample this year, but if they can get a good rusticle sample and we can look at the rings, we'll see if the growth has slowed down during the past 2 years. That'll help to tell us more. And actually, we can start chemically sampling each layer of ring and also see what changes are taking place 2 miles above the Titanic. So they're a very, very important organism. They're taking the pulse of the ocean's health, and whether or not we're having something to do with it, we may learn that from the rusticles too. But I expect that during the last 2 years, the growth rings are probably very narrow, and that the growth rate of the rusticles, in fact, in some of the pictures this year, we can see along the rail, along the bow, at least some of the rusticles have fallen off. So maybe rusticle growth is slowing down. We just don't know for sure yet.
What do rusticles live on? Tell me, Russ, right?
They're very opportunistic. They live off of the nutrients that are coming down from the upper waters. They are living off of the metal that the Titanic is made of. They're able to metabolize that, the sulfur within the metal, all sorts of things. And in 2003, we traced the origins of the rusticles to these deep ocean volcanic vents.
Ah, okay.
And interestingly, were they not made of bacterial and fungal cells? We would say that because they're complex enough that we would say that just like sponges, they belong to the field of zoology, but sponges are made of nucleated cells. They have an interconnected circulatory system. In fact, the 460-foot long section of the Titanic's bow, it has been converted into one of the world's largest living organisms. They even have a chemically based immune system from which they fight off certain things like these deep ocean nucleated cells, these amoebas. They produce toxins that keep them at bay. And it looks like one of these, there's a lot of antibiotics that we're seeing that we're discovering. And the potential for at least one or two of these antibiotics together, that because you're fighting off amoeboids, if there continues to be a need for new chemotherapeutic drugs, it looks like we may have an anti-cancer drug that is not any more invasive to healthy cells than an antibiotic. So that's one of the hopes of things we might get out of the Titanic's rusticles. And sometimes I've said, I wish I could go back in time and tell Thomas Andrews that, the designer, one of the ship's designers, and the last thing he ever saw was his creation breaking up around him, killing 1,500 people. And if only he could be told that what's happening around him might eventually, because of the rusticles, save far, far many more people than the Titanic took that night.
Well, the rusticles are beautiful. I mean, they are.
Yeah.
They're just beautiful.
They are an absolutely amazing organism. They're about, you and about 3 other people in the whole world find the rusticles beautiful. There are those who would want to drop poison down there and kill them so that they would stop metabolizing the Titanic steel. But as Roy Cullimore was the first microbiologist to go to the Titanic full time, he said, you realize that iron ore came out of the ground and we turned it into the metal of the Titanic, and the rusticles are giving it all back to the earth as iron ore again. The rusticles, when they fall off of the side of the Titanic, they break an arm, and that arm falls off the side of the Titanic, and it goes into the ocean sediment. It's going back as iron ore.
Mm-hmm.
And he
Well,
said it's sort of like the cycle that the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius saw, that everything, even the purple ink in his robes, would go back and cycle back into the earth again and again.
Well, I think one of the things that most people don't understand, when you get that far down in the ocean, it's absolutely pitch black.
Yeah,
and
the only light is the light you bring with you, or the light of the biolumes, as we sometimes call them, the bioluminescent light down there and in between all the way up to the surface. And in fact, if you see the movie Avatar, the deep ocean was a lot of the inspiration for what you see on the planet Pandora at night.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
And we see organisms down there 2.5 miles down. I mean, we still don't know what a flashing milk dud was. It was about the size of it and shape of a milk dud. And if it went by your viewport and it flashed into your eye, you would be kind of light blast blinded in that eye for a few seconds.
Wow. No, I think that's when people think about the Titanic on the bottom, we see illuminated pictures, but we don't realize that there's illumination there. And once you guys go away with the floodlight.
Right. In 2001, some organism switched on twice. At first I thought it was the other submersible coming at us with its lamps on. But the other submersible had gone back to the surface a half hour before, so okay, I just looked at it and filmed it in high def and said, go away, please, because it was big.
Now, I have a question.
It was about half the size of our submersible.
Oh, wow. Have you ever come across any large fish down that low, or is it just small organisms?
Well, that thing with the lights was about 15, 20 feet long.
That's big.
Occasionally, if you're moving along the bottom, something gets annoyed by your lights, and you see the big puffs of sediment that its tail whips up as it leaves.
Are there any?
And Ralph White, at the bow section, he saw a large organism. He didn't know what it was, but it was hanging out near the aft end of the bow section of the Titanic, near a couple of the boilers.
Would be interesting just to see. It fascinates me that it's down that far. It's so dark. Are there any volcanic vents down there? I mean, are there any vents that could be changing?
Not at the Titanic site. No, not near it. None that we know of anyway. And none that we see any traces of in the sediment samples.
And the bottom is basically just sand.
Hundreds of miles away there are vents, and that's where the rusticles, so you probably have spores of all sorts of microorganisms that can just drift across the ocean bottom for hundreds of years until they start collecting along a friendly shore. Usually it would be a hydrothermal vent because there are about more than 30,000 miles of continental spreading centers spread along the ocean bottoms. And so if it could drift for a couple of hundred years, come across a friendly shore, germinate, and that's kind of what happens. You have a constant flow of these organisms. Titanic probably wasn't down there more than 10 years before rusticles began to grow.
Wow. And there's so much there that could be theoretically brought up yet. Are they going to be pulling any more of the artifacts from the bottom, or are they going to just let everything sit?
There are no plans for bringing up artifacts now, but there are some artifacts that I think should be brought up, and I was convinced of that when in the 1990s, just before, I think it was just before the 1995, they brought up a steamer trunk that had letters and diaries in it that could still be read. And that was the story of Howard Irwin and Pearl's shuttle. And it was so like, in fact, you'll get the full story if you read Farewell Titanic, because when I wrote Ghost of the Titanic, all of the sulfur had not yet been taken out of the diary and everything, so we didn't know the full story. And the families of Howard Irwin and Pearl's shuttle had not been found yet. But there was a story there that is every bit as improbable as the story of Jack and Rose in Titanic. In fact, when I first met Jim, I asked him, how did you know about Howard and Pearl? Because we had only just started really reading it. And he said, I didn't. And then I told him about it. I said, these two guys who traveled together, they even won their ticket on the Titanic.
Wow.
And actually, the real story is even more tragic than in the movie Titanic. So when people say to me, oh, that was all so improbable, that could never happen, I said, well, as a matter of fact, it did. It's just that Jim Cameron didn't know about it yet. That's why he says things, maybe there are echoes through time. And in fact, his documentary, Ghost of the Abyss, starts with that.
Wow. Well, I think that I don't think the Titanic has given up all its secrets yet.
Oh, no. Because to me, the letters of Howard Irwin and Pearl, the diary of Howard Irwin, the letters of Pearl and her mother, these people that we didn't know about. Howard Irwin was not even on the passenger manifest. And so, these people that sometimes we didn't even know about, after more than 100 years, archaeology is helping them to tell their stories, to speak clear. And one of the robots that got inside the Titanic found all these bags from the mailroom still there, intact, with a sheath of protective bacteria over the bags. So letters that were written during the voyage might still be readable. And, people can talk about a shipment of diamonds that was on the way and things like that. I generally don't get excited until you find wood and letters and organic material intact. And the real treasure of the Titanic, to me, is whatever writing might have survived and might still be there.
Well, yeah.
And we've got the letters from one brother to another. Now we know that this guy was traveling under an assumed name. A lot of people were doing that at the time. And he was worried about the price of ostrich feathers or something in his letters to his brother. But along the way, we found out some puzzling things that were in the diary of a survivor. And who are these people who were traveling? Well, now we got the story of these two people, these two lovers who were married, but each to someone else.
Uh-huh.
So,
there's just, I think...
And you wonder how many more stories are like that still in suitcases, steamer trunks, and in the mailroom that we don't know about. And that also give us details about what it was to sail around the world in those days, some things that we just didn't know. Howard Irwin ended up, we now know from the family, ended up coming across as a stowaway on the Titanic's sister ship Olympic years later. In the same portion of the ship where we have accounts that from some of the crew that worked below deck, that they allowed stowaways to live in the cargo area in the bow section of the Titanic because in return they let them keep their bunks clean and set up and everything, and helped with a few things below deck when these guys came back from shoveling coal all day. And all he knew, this one crewman who survived by jumping off the stern of the Titanic as it went down, and he wrote about his regret of never having learned their names and knowing that they were right where the iceberg punched through, and that those men were among the very first people to die on the Titanic.
Wow. You make tragedy a fascinating story. You weave so much humanity into it that it's impossible to look at it coldly ever again. And I think there is definitely a talent and a skill there for sure, because you even with the telepot tomb, it's the same thing. You humanize it and you put the person right into the story as opposed to telling a story. And maybe that's what it is. You're not telling a story, you're allowing the reader to live the story. That's why it's so hard to put your books down.
And I don't even quite know how I do it. And working with Simca was great because when we were doing the Talpiot Tomb book, originally I had written the whole thing up kind of like Darwin's Origin of Species. And he said, no, the reader has to be in there doing it. But I thought this was so important that it had to be just a straight scientific monograph. And Jim Cameron said, on the science, you nailed it. You killed it. And then Simca said, yeah, but not so much on the humanity. And I learned a lot from the way Simca took the book and took it apart and dissected it. And for one thing, made it from a 500-page book into what it is.
Yeah.
And, so I really learned, I absorbed a lot watching him, and taking instruction from him on how to do it, which then affected how I wrote my next book, which was the one about Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And I don't think I was ever really, really ready to really write that book the way it had to be written. Somehow I just feel, I don't even know quite how, but it required writing with Simca to find the necessary voice to write Tail and Back, the Last Train from Hiroshima.
Well, it is the most touching book I've ever read. And I've read a lot of good books. But that one takes you in and puts you there. And I think that's,
I just kind of hope the people, too many of them who walk around today saying, oh, nuke this one, nuke that one, they just don't know what the word nuke means.
Oh, God, no. And I think what you've got is, when you're writing a book, you can either be a technician or an artist. That you can tell when you listen to, for instance, a piano player. You know the ones that are great technicians, but then you listen to someone play who is an artist, and you flow with
when they're in
music.
Another world playing the piano.
They catch you into the moment, and you experience it with them. I think that's what you do with writing. You're not a technician, you're an artist when it comes to using the words and creating a feeling and a mood it's not something, actually, I don't think that you learn. I think you either have it or you don't.
And I have no idea where it comes from. When I was 7 years old, I was injured really bad in a really horrible event, and I had to learn how to read and write and speak all over again.
Wow.
And had a serious speech impediment and so on. And somehow, I don't know how, but I think somehow it gave me more of a love of words, having to climb those extra hurdles. And words to me just somehow became, a sentence had to read and feel kind of like music.
Yeah.
I remember frustrating the hell out of my fourth grade teacher that I would at that time take so long to write a sentence, and I couldn't spell, and had to learn how to spell all over again.
Well, thank God for spell check.
Yeah, but maybe that's what gave me, something about that. I have one family member who says, yeah, the injury is what gave you, you might be the video camera that got dropped, and one out of every 500 million cameras that you drop, it can see another part of the spectrum or something, that it gets better. And you're like the 500 millionth one that got dropped on its head and worked a little better.
Well,
that's what my Uncle Dondi says.
Well, I think there is that element of, when you have that gift, it comes naturally, so you don't think about it. But I would imagine there are people all over the world that try to do it and fall short. I've met a couple of authors that can do it. Dina Miriam is one of them. Her book's on her past life experiences. You are so taken into the past life, you don't want her to die because you're enjoying the life so much. And yet you go to the next life, and same characters, same spirits, different characters, yet you still continue that flow and that journey with her. It's the same way with what you write. You're on a journey, and especially with Dust, I felt everything. A number of times I had to get up and take a shower because I felt so grubby. What we've been through. I was there. You take the reader in that they're reading the whole thing, and it's sort of like you never stop to think about our water supply, and if our water supply is corrupted, then what do we drink? And I'm a Diet Coke freak. And I thought, well, if I had enough cases of this, I could probably last a lot longer if I couldn't drink the tap water. When you realize that the tap water was infected, that there, nothing was safe, and if you went to a stream, because usually you think of streams and clean water, and they were corrupted because there were the dead bodies of animals and stuff that were rotting in the water, so there were there were microorganisms there. When you realize that things that you think would be safe turn into weapons against you, it's like, holy crap.
Yeah, I was in one region of China in 1987 where there was a bit of a problem with radiation. And it was in the fish, it was in the water, it was in the crops that were growing there. So for almost a week, a Coca-Cola bottling company had recently come into China, and for almost a week, I lived off of Coca-Cola. Just didn't want to eat anything grown in the region.
Oh, yeah. But when you think, that was short term.
The water, the food, everything was bad in that area. I think that might have actually been part of the inspiration for that part of the novel. And what you said, you have a lot of Diet Coke to live off of for a little while.
Yeah, and it's just when you think of, people looting. In many cases, when I've watched, looters on TV, and I sit there and I think, okay, they're going in and they're taking just armloads of clothing. How do they know it'll all fit? It's just they're taking stuff that is of no use to them, and yet because
probably gets sold. If it doesn't fit, it gets sold on eBay or sold to a friend or family member or something. Who knows?
Or taking TVs and there's no electricity anymore. They'll do that. that there's an irrational attitude that takes over these people who are rioting, and they don't think about.
And it's nothing
just
new.
taking.
I mean, there are actually, historical records of some of the riots in ancient Rome. And it was just the same irrationality you see today, except the technology is different and the clothing is different. But humans aren't that different.
No.
In the good and the bad. I mean, we now know when Herculaneum was about to be buried by Vesuvius, there were a few people who stayed by the marina, launching as many people they could away on whatever boats were available. They were even trying to repair one broken boat to get it out there and to get some of these women and children who were huddling under the arches of the marina and just get another boat away before it got any worse. And then the surge cloud came, and that's exactly how everyone was preserved in their last fraction of a second of life.
Wow. It is incredible. I just noticed we're almost out of time here. I thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule. Oh, listen, I could talk to you forever. But we have a date in April to go into the Titanic,
right?
And really
we'll have much
dig
more
deep.
information about the Titanic then too. Yeah.
That'll be very exciting, and I still think you're going to write a book on 9/11 as well.
Yeah, well, actually, that novel I mentioned, it touches very much on 9/11 and archaeology. Well, basically, I mean, I lost a family member in there too, among other people, and I realized I knew everything that happened in her office at that moment, and plus I've survived a couple of plane crashes myself, and around a year ago Jim Cameron said, "You've never written about some of these really painful things. You've got to put it in," and I was thinking of writing this novel, and he said, "You put that in that novel, put all of it in there." And I've been doing it, so. But it would have never been written if he hadn't said do that. But yeah, 9/11 is a very central part of this novel.
Terrific. I'm looking forward to it. But I want to thank you so much for taking your time out of your busy schedule to share your stuff with me. And I look forward to speaking with you again in April for sure on the Titanic.
Okay, thank you. See you again.
Absolutely.
See you later.
Take care now. Yeah.
Right.
Bye now.
Bye.
And thank you, everybody, for being here. Do tune in tomorrow night. We have a fascinating show with Mark Eddy. And look forward to seeing you all back here again soon. Check out YouTube. This will be up on YouTube later today. If you like what you hear and you've been inspired slightly by it, please subscribe to the channel. That's how we know you're listening. Take care now, everybody, and have a great one. Bye-bye.